Hey guys, and welcome to session 1 for June 7th. Today we are moving back into the Old Testament and we're going to begin a study in the book of Joshua. So we're going to start with the question, who was Joshua? Before we even look at chapter 1, let's take a few minutes and try to understand who Joshua is. Most people when they think of Joshua, they think of Jericho, they think of the Promised Land, military leader, victories. The phrase "be strong and courageous" is throughout Joshua. Those words are associated with Joshua, and that's actually the title of our lesson today: "Be strong and courageous." So Joshua did not suddenly just show up in chapter 1 of his book. By the time he assumes leadership of Israel, God has been preparing him for decades. Joshua's original name was Hoshea, and that means salvation in Hebrew. Numbers 13:16 tells us that Moses changed his name to Joshua or Yehoshua, and that means the Lord saves. So Joshua has gone from generic salvation to the specific the Lord saves. And it's significant because Joshua and Jesus actually share the same name. And that's not by accident. We can view Joshua as an archetype of Jesus. In Hebrew, it's Yehoshua. In Greek, it's Iesus. And in English, we say Jesus. But all those names mean the Lord saves. So Joshua becomes this beautiful Old Testament picture of Christ. And here's where it gets interesting. Moses, who represents the law, led the people right up to the Promised Land. But the law couldn't lead them in. Joshua, Jesus, is how they're able to enter. Just like Joshua leads people into their inheritance, Jesus leads believers into eternal rest. So there's a beautiful picture there. Let's look at his background for a second. So Joshua was the son of Nun. He was from the tribe of Ephraim. He was not a priest. He was not royalty. He was not from a famous family. And there's a lesson there. God chooses ordinary people for extraordinary assignments. But despite all that, he has spent about 40 years preparing for leadership. Exodus 17 tells us he was a military commander under Moses. He led Israel in attacks against Amalek and defenses. He was Moses' right-hand man. In Exodus 24:13, he became Moses' assistant, and we know that he learned directly from Moses. In Exodus 33:11, the story talks about Joshua as a man of God's presence. He was captivated by God's presence. When everyone else would leave the tent of meeting, including Moses, we're told that Joshua would stay there at the tent of meeting where God's presence was. He was a faithful spy. In Numbers 13 through 14, 10 spies went into the land and they saw giants, but Joshua and Caleb went in and they saw God's promise. In Numbers 27, Moses publicly commissioned him before the nation, so everyone knew this is God's man and this is Moses' man to lead us. So really what we're talking about when we go into Joshua chapter 1 is we're talking about a transition of authority. Joshua is experienced, he's respected, he's battle-tested, he's spiritually mature, but God is still going to tell him to be strong and courageous. Now, the most common command in the Bible is fear not or do not be afraid. So what's the difference in fear not, do not be afraid, and be strong and courageous? Well, it's this. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's moving forward in spite of your fear. So before we read Joshua 1, let's look at something that I think a lot of sports fans would understand. The hardest job in sports is not always building a program if you're coaching. One of the hardest jobs is when you have to follow a legend. If you think about the guy, DeBoer at Alabama following Nick Saban. You think about Lou Holtz had to follow Frank Broyles. When Frank Broyles stepped down as Arkansas's head coach, we weren't just replacing a coach, that we were replacing the coach. Frank Broyles had won a national championship. He'd won 7 Southwest Conference championships. He built Arkansas into a national power. Then Lou Holtz gets the job. Now think about that pressure. Every game is compared to Broyles. Every decision is compared to Broyles. Every loss is compared to Broyles. So the challenge is not just coaching football. The challenge is coaching football in the shadow of Frank Broyles. And that's Joshua's situation. Because Moses was not just a military leader. Moses was the guy who confronted Pharaoh. He led the Israelites out of Egypt during the Exodus. He parted the Red Sea. He received the law. This is the guy who spoke to God face to face. Now he's dead. And Joshua is the man that's got to follow him. So imagine you're Joshua thinking, how in the world do I replace Moses? Well, the answer is you don't. Joshua was never going to be Moses. God never told Joshua, I need you to be Moses. What he says is this, and it's beautiful. He says, just as I was with Moses, I will be with you. So the lesson here is this. Joshua's confidence is not in Moses. Joshua's confidence is in Moses' God. Now, most of us are never going to lead a nation. Most of us are never going to coach a major football program. But many of us have followed a parent or a pastor or a teacher, a boss or a mentor. And I would guess we've all wondered, can I really do this? So the book of Joshua begins with God's answer to that question. It's this: you can, because I'm with you. Let's break down some of the text and we'll look at it kind of piece by piece. I'll keep it short. When you start in verses 1 through 2, it starts with these words: after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord. So Moses, my servant, is dead. That's what God says. Those are some of the most significant words in the Old Testament. Moses was a giant figure to the Israelites. Israel is grieving. Their leader is gone. Their mentor is gone. Their prophet is gone. For 40 years, Moses has led them through thick and thin. And now he's gone. And the first thing God says is this. He says, now therefore arise. Joshua, he's gone. Now you get up. See, the leader changed, but the mission didn't. The people are uncertain. God is not. Something else to pull out of this. Notice God's description of Moses. He says, Moses, my servant. Hebrew word for that is Ebed, and it means a servant or a bondservant. It doesn't mean miracle worker. It doesn't mean prophet. It doesn't mean national hero. God's favorite title for Moses is my servant. So the world celebrates achievement, and God celebrates faithfulness. And there's a leadership principle here. Whenever God's people become more dependent on a leader than on the Lord, they're in trouble. When our churches become more dependent on their leader than on the Lord, they're in trouble. No doubt Moses was important, but Israel's hope was never Moses. Israel's hope was God. Sometimes God calls us to grieve. Sometimes God calls us to wait. But just like he said to Joshua, eventually God is going to call us to move forward. Joshua could have spent the rest of his life talking about Moses, but God says to him, get up, it's time to go to work. Moving on into verses 3 through 5. Verse 3 says, every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon, I have given to you. I love those words because notice this. It says, I have given. That is written in past tense. I have already done it. The conquest has not started. The walls of Jericho are across that river. They still stand. There are enemies occupying the land. And God talks to Joshua as though the mission is already accomplished. Why? Because it is. Because God's promises are that certain. Whenever God says, I will give it to you, I have given to you, the word is natan. And it means to give or to grant or to bestow. And the thought is almost like a gift. The land is God's gift to the Israelites. Israel's going to fight. They're going to have to fight. But God is going to provide the victory. See, fear focuses on obstacles. Faith focuses on promises. So we have to learn to look past the obstacles and see the promises. Joshua can look across that river and he can see walls, he can see armies, he can see a lot of marching and a lot of people griping. But God looks across and he sees inheritance, he sees promise, he sees victory. Well, moving on, God tells Joshua that no man shall stand before you. Now, he didn't promise Joshua, he didn't say no battles, no hardship, no opposition. What he promised was victory, victory through the battles. Christians sometimes mistakenly assume that when we encounter difficulty, that means God's absent. Joshua teaches us just the opposite. Times of difficulty are where God demonstrates his faithfulness the most clearly. Look at verse 5. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. I think this is probably my favorite verse in the whole chapter. Notice what God does not say. He does not say, Joshua, you're talented. Joshua, you're experienced. He doesn't even say, let's go, Joshua, you got this. What he says is this: I will be with you. He says, I will not leave you. I will not forsake you. And I like the word leave there, rapha. What it means is this. It means literally to let go or to release, to loosen one's grip. What he says is, I will not let go of you. He says, I will not let go of you. And then forsake, that's the word azab. It means to abandon or to desert. God tells Joshua, I'm not going to let go of you, and I'm not ever going to abandon you. My goodness, is that not amazing? Joshua's strength is not Joshua. Joshua's strength is God's presence. This is the same God who was with Abraham, with Moses, with Jacob, and now he's with Joshua. And go into the New Testament, there's the same promise. I am with you always, even until the end of the age. Verses 6 through 9. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. 3 times in this little passage, God says, be strong and courageous. Why? Why would he have to do that for Joshua? And I think it's this, because as experienced as Joshua is, God knows that fear can and will creep in. And that's okay. Biblical courage is not fearlessness. It's obedience despite fear. And that's the lesson that I want our class to really focus on this, is how do you put one foot in front of the other when you are scared, when you have fear. And the way you do it is you focus on God's presence. God never tells Joshua, feel brave, Joshua. He says, obey. Because the source of Joshua's courage is God's promise. It's his presence and it's his word. So what are the keys to success for Joshua there? If you read verse 8, God tells us. God's strategy is actually kind of surprising. He doesn't tell Joshua, go build a big army. He doesn't say, come up with a better battle plan. What he tells him is, stay in my word. That's what he tells him. The Hebrew word hagah, meditate on it. And meditate biblically does not mean, like we get this idea of Hindu people practicing meditation and all that, and you clear your mind, empty your mind. Biblical meditation is not emptying your mind. It's filling your mind with God's word. That's what biblical meditation means. Meditate on it. Mutter it. Say it over and over. Rehearse it. Speak it repeatedly. That's what the word hagah means that God tells him to do. So that's the keys to success. This is not a prosperity gospel. Success means this: faithfully accomplishing God's purposes. Joshua's success is not measured by Joshua. It's measured by his obedience. Not his popularity, not his comfort, not his wealth. It's his obedience. You cannot consistently think contrary to God's truth and consistently live according to God's will. So, everything comes together in verse 9. That's the foundation of courage. Be strong, be courageous, and then he's given a prohibition. Do not be frightened, do not be dismayed. Why? Because the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Joshua still has a river to cross, enemies to fight, battles to win. Nothing about his circumstances has changed. But everything about his perspective should change. Why? Because God is with him. So, kind of concluding this chapter, Joshua 1 teaches us this: God's work continues after leaders changed. God's promises can be trusted. God's presence is our greatest source of courage, and God's word is the keys to our success. And then this: we are saved by grace through faith, not works. But faith gets up and goes to work. Joshua's confidence was never rooted in Joshua's ability to do anything. It was rooted in God's promise when he said, I will be with you. And the same promise is there for us today. So I'm going to conclude with that, and I hope this gives you guys some talking points to share with your class. And I want you to know I appreciate you guys and everything that you all do for your class and for your church. I'm going to be praying for you guys as always. Thank you all for joining in.